impression of his face. Now, Joe wrote about Hopper was, 6'5". He grew a foot in his adolescence. In 1 year, he grew a foot. He never physically fit into any space. And he wrote about that. She had to have a custom-made bed for the house in Truro to use it to fit his feet. But there's no way that the figure would fit in that space. Now, let's go to the next one here. Now, even here, look at this. Now, this again, here we have, look at how tiny the man is and how big the woman is. And look at the bed. There's no way that woman could fit on that bed. They couldn't possibly fit there together. But also, the woman couldn't possibly fit in that bed. And this bed is made of cement. Does everyone see that that bed is made of cement? I wrote a whole lot about it. The beds are supposed to be comfy, cozy, warm. Is that not a stone slab? Is that not a stone slab? She doesn't even make a dent with her buxom, or it's not her bust, it's her other end. But it doesn't even make a dent in the bed. So, and again, he's another one of the slumped men. Okay, go ahead. Thank you. So this thing about the way the figures occupy physical space, I see as another kind of almost autobiographical component. That's the way he saw the world. Okay, there's another one, I think, of the Pleading Man. Oh, here we go, Summer Evening, which Gail Levin said, and I agree, this is the porch of his house in Nyack. It looks very much like the house. Now it's covered with wisteria. Another pleading man and a rigid woman. Now she, again, she's not having any of this. Whatever this is about, she's staring straight ahead. She's not listening to him. And he's leaning into her, practically with his hand on his chest, and he's like, something, and she just isn't responding. So we see this dynamic between these couples throughout, again, his later masterworks, and it all goes back to when he was first with Alta. So the premise is that what we see in the paintings, based on what we know of his emotional life during the Alta years, really kind of, as the Times reporter said, it's revelatory. It illuminates, it helps us to understand where those later figures came from. Let's see, what's next? Okay, now what's this one? Oh, she's so nasty. Okay, I don't see why you should take it as an affront. In fact, I should read this in the book, I can see it better. So she's sculpting him now. It's now 1909. There are more letters written in 1909. This is his third trip back to Paris. And he pursues her. There are 19 letters over a period of 4 months in 1909. And this is when things really heat up. Here it is. Oh, this is the next one. So she's saying, she's just constantly putting him off. Here it is. I cannot see why you should take it as an affront that I would not see you Saturday evening. You had just been here Thursday evening, and I expected to see you again in a few days. While the friend with whom I dined last night, I had not seen for 3 weeks. I think it was a very ordinary thing to do. However, I'm very sorry you were so bored, and also I cannot possibly see you until Thursday. I shall expect you then, unless I hear from you otherwise. So she's just, hello, she's just seriously not nice. Now let's see the next one. These again are leading into, this is, wouldn't take everything so alarmingly seriously. I do wish you wouldn't take everything so alarmingly seriously. It is most distressing. Certainly I might have spared you one evening this week. I might have also spared several other people one evening. And where would my evenings have been? I have not discriminated against you, but I have not discriminated in your favor either. Surely if I chose not to go out for a week or so, I ought to treat everyone alike. Don't you think so? I am sorry you take it in such a different way. But I must say, I don't think you were at all reasonable, are you now? So really, this has to make him just feel, utterly rejected or dejected or not happy. Now let's see the next one. Okay, that was 1909. 1909 is the period where he's pursuing her most ardently, and that's the kind of reaction he's getting. This is singled out as being the most enigmatic painting Hopper ever did. He painted it in the summer of 1909. He comes back from Paris to his boyhood home in Nyack, and he paints this. This figure is slumped on the floor of the bedroom of his boyhood home. She is next to the bed that he was sleeping in at the time. And for years, no one could figure out where this painting came from. There was no explanation for it, nothing similar to it. And now I think it's clear that whatever kinds of emotions, and we know they were not pleasant ones, he was experiencing as the relationship wound down. In fact, I believe he was so distressed he left Paris earlier because this squabbling was unrelenting, and came back to New York. Also, at that point, there's an 11-month gap in the letters. That's the longest gap we have. And we got this figure, you know, slumped on the floor. This also has been described as some kind of a sexual trauma painting. What's happened here? Clearly, the woman is despondent, distressed. Every conceivable adjective has been used to describe what perhaps happened to her. I have to credit my dear friend and colleague, Avis Berman, who was a Hopper scholar, and we worked together on a Hopper show up at Nyack, and she stood in front of the painting and said, it's totally him. That he has conveyed all his feelings of despondency and dejection onto this figure. And that's one of Avis's premises, that he often expresses in paintings of both genders things that he was experiencing. And when you think of it, this is very much, when you read the trail of letters of her rejecting him, and him reaching out, and him constantly being pushed away, that would certainly just, those kinds of emotions are certainly embodied in this. So we still don't know, but we do know more about it certainly than we did before. And obviously it was a very private painting. It was only shown once in his lifetime in a retrospective, and he carried on about not wanting it to be included in the show. He never chose for it to be exhibited, so it was a very private painting. And you can go, if you happen to be in New York, and go to Nyack to Edward Hopper's boyhood home. This is the bedroom, and the door is open looking into the room. You can still see the space. Okay, let's see the next one. So now it's not so much another. Okay, now we're going to Saint-Germain. Now it's Paris. This is July 1909. This is before I got home. This is when they had one period when they were definitely getting along. They're trying to schedule a trip out to Saint-Germain, which was a town outside Paris. And there are several letters referencing the desire to go there. I just picked this one because it was the earliest example. They didn't actually go there, they went later. But let's see the next picture. So when he got back to New York, after he painted the summer interior, he painted Valley of the Seine and described to his father that this was the view from Saint-Germain. And he went out to Saint-Germain with Alta. And the place that they went, there was a high terrace, and from the terrace they look out over this view. So we know the Valley of the Seine, even though he painted it when he got back to New York, it evokes the place that he had been to with her, which gives it a kind of personal meaning, which will become more meaningful later on. But we know that that's a locale he associates with her. Okay, let's see the next one. Okay, now, Washington Square. One of the joys of primary documents. We had thought, by all accounts, that he moved to the studio in Washington Square in December of 1913. And this is a postmarked letter to Hopper in September of 1913, which establishes that he moved into the studio sooner than he thought. What's really interesting, I was talking to the dean of the NYU School of Social Work. Again, they now occupy the building. And what's really funny is God knows what he said, because she said, Washington Square North sounds quite alarming. Now, what could have been alarming about Washington Square North in 1913, we don't know. But anyway, it establishes that he was there, and then she said, I hope you're having a good break, and like your new studio. So this establishes that he was in the studio in September of 1913. In fact, I'm going to give the talk in the fall on the 100th anniversary of when this letter was sent. So, but again, we don't know what was alarming about Washington Square North. I'll have to look into that. Okay, let's see the next one. And this is the view of the studio at the building. So this is 3 Washington Square North, that's the building. His studio is on the 4th floor, and this is a view of the studio. And again, they have restored it so that it looks very much as it did when he was there. That's his printing press that stayed in the studio, even though he didn't make a print after the mid-20s. He kept it as a hat rack. He hung his hat, never took it away. And the potbelly store is still there. So it's significant because the last letter from Alta was sent to Washington Square North. Okay, let's see here. What's next? Okay, this is the last letter. Now, I'm going to read this to you because you can't possibly see it. It's the last letter. And what's so interesting, I don't know if you've gotten a sense of the penmanship in the other letter. She often wrote in a sort of flamboyant style with an India fountain pen, but the ink was certainly very clear, and she wrote darkly. This letter, which is the last one that she wrote, you almost get the sense that she's crying while she writes it. And even in the original, it isn't much darker than this. You can barely make it out. Now, what's happened here, and Sanborn described this as he just kept saying he was stricken. The letter before this, she has announced she's getting married. She just wrote to him. He was in Algonquin that summer. He was painting in in Maine, and she wrote to him, and he was making pictures. In fact, that's what's interesting about what he did with his art at the time. But he was in Maine in August. She wrote to him there about a book he'd sent her, very casual. Then the next letter in September to Washington Square, she said, "It's time for me to start telling my friends I'm about to be married. I'm marrying Mr. Bleeker. We're going to be living in Brooklyn together. I hope you'd like to come visit." Now, what happened after that clearly was wrenching. There was some kind of an account. Sanborn related about he sent her a telegram, he tried to go after her. What this says, again, so faintly, it's as if the pen barely touched the paper. "Dear Mr. Copper, I cannot tell you how sorry I am to have made you unhappy. Surely you must know how deeply I regret it. I want to tell you why I sent those telegrams to your house as well as your studio, in case it should have caused you any annoyance. I was in the next town at the time, and your messages were telephoned to me from home, so perhaps I did not get them quite clear. I was afraid you were starting out at once and did not know where to catch you to prevent the useless journey. I wanted to explain in case you thought it inconsiderate of me, and to tell you that I would have done anything I could not to distress you anymore. I thank you with all my heart for all you have done for me and offered me, and I beg you to forgive me for causing you such unhappiness." So, Olive was upset. Clearly, there was an emotionally wrenching situation. So this is the last letter, and she announces on the 14th, this is October 14th, she signed it with her married name. She signs it Alta Hillsdale Bleeker, so by now she's married. Now, what does he do in reaction to the emotional distress of having this woman run off and marry someone else after 10 years of pursuing her? He paints this. Now, this is Scar Blue, dated from 1914. So he painted this literally right after he found out about her marriage. And what's interesting, I did this in the show in Nyack, I put up some reproductions. He's painting boats in Algonquin. So he's not painting France anymore. He hasn't painted France in a long time. He's basically off in his sailboat period. And then all of a sudden, he stretches the largest canvas he ever stretched, and he paints Scar Blue, which, and again, for years, enigmatic, highly enigmatic. It's in the exhibition at the Whitney now. Carter Foster did the drawing show. Basically what Carter did was line up all of Hopper's preparatory studies and present them along with the oils so you can see what his thought processes were, what his sources were. And Carter looked at a lot of his drawings of prostitutes and different characters. The only preparatory sketch that specifically relates to this painting is a drawing of this figure. He is a procurer. He's there to help the girlfriend get some dates. So, and the rest of the figures are based on other sketches that he did. This was described, he exhibited it once, and it was loathed. People said it captured and reflected hardened emotions. These were bitter absinthe drinkers, but everybody basically thought it was sort of caustic, which it is. The prostitute, columnar, she's there, couldn't be more prominent. Hopper always designated women as prostitutes by putting lots of rouge on their cheeks, so clearly she's there. What's interesting is the only sort of happy couple having a romantic evening. She's dressed in her finery, having a glass of wine, and her boyfriend can't get his eyes off the prostitute. So even here, they're sort of not connected. Hopper is clearly the clown. He portrays himself as the clown. The last painting he did is called Two Comedians, and it shows two figures, a male and a female, tall man, little woman, and he said it was he and Joe. And it shows them coming out and taking the final bow dressed in clown costumes. And so he clearly identified himself with the clown and the eyes down his. Now, what's interesting, among other things, is the location. The location here with the balustrade here and the sort of shallow space of the terrace and the landscape in the background clearly evokes Saint-Germain. Let's see the next picture. It evokes, this is Two Pigeons, which he did later. But the location and the setting for Scar Blue is clearly derivative of that panoramic view that we saw in Valley of the Seine, which again was Saint-Germain, which is a place he'd gone to with Joe.